Welcome to the Divine Counsel Worldview Podcast. Today we'll be handling or answering the question, what happened to Joseph? He's in prison. He's done the right thing. Potiphar put him in prison, and we'll pick it up in Genesis 40, and we'll get through the end of 41, Mike. That's my goal. We said, in fact, at the end of the last episode that the story presents itself as though, even though he's doing everything right, he's in a prison, everything's going wrong for him. And of course, we know as the reader that Yahweh's with Joseph, thus we sense everything will turn out. That's how we would read it. But again, it's not how it looks on the front end. And I mentioned that I still see on TV preachers going down this path of what we'd call health and wealth, name it, claim it. And let's make it even a more mature way of saying it, because this is exactly how usually they'll use the Bible to defend themselves. They'll pick up verses which are in our Bible, like Psalm 37:4. I have never seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread. And if we have, here goes the sermon now, if we have a high view of Scripture, inerrancy, inspiration, authority of Scripture, well, there's the verse. It says right there, I have never seen the righteous forsaken. So we use verses, or people use verses like this, and then they couch it in a way of saying, and I believe the Bible. And do you believe the Bible? Well, if you believe the Bible, then you have these verses. And so coming out of even our stories of Genesis, we have people doing right and suspecting that God will come behind them and do the right thing. Joseph did this, or Jacob did this in 31, wasn't it? We just talked about this, that he said, if you give me food and clothing, I will take you as my deity. And that seems to be the same idea, right? So we have enough verses. I've always struggled with this when it comes to writing a theology or presenting a theology, that if I can get just enough verses behind my statements, just the right just the right ones, and have enough of them, it will have the effect, even if I don't have a strong point, that you have to believe me because I got all these verses right. And that's not how we use the Bible, of course. Everyone has all the verses, so it's how we interpret them now comes into play. And so let me read a quote from D.A. Carson. It's in his book called How Long, O Lord? Reflections on Suffering and Evil in 2006. This is on page 63. Despite the best efforts of the proponents of the health and wealth gospel, the fact is that Christians get old and wrinkled. They contract cancer, heart disease, become deaf and blind, and eventually die. In many parts of the world, Christians have to face the blight of famine, the scourge of war, the subtle coercion of corruption. This is not to say that God does not sometimes intervene on behalf of his people in remarkable ways. It is to say, rather, that we, too, live in a fallen world and cannot escape participation in its evil and suffering. If you doubt this, and here's where Carson is so D.A. Carson, if you doubt this, you are, number one, ignorant of what many Christians around the world have to face daily. Number two, not old enough yet, for certainly if you live long enough, you too will suffer. Number three, kidding yourself. Or number four, some combination of the above. So, like I say, as only Carson can do sometimes, he's very blunt about it, and I appreciate that on this issue. What do you think? Is this in your background, Mike? I mean, coming out of your background and, looking forward, how has that affected your theology over the years?
People, especially it's been, like, we talked about this a couple of podcasts before, where sometimes in theology things get trendy. And I remember there has been a time where, speaking bad or speaking against the prosperity gospel, or its many variations was trendy, I would almost say, right? The people would say, oh, we don't want to be people who follow a prosperity gospel. And I would say, yes and amen. But, if I was honest with myself and honest as well to even the heritage that I grew up in, right, that there's still a little bit of a prosperity gospel kind of thinking sometimes within our own theology. We come at God often at times with, well, obviously, if I do good, I should get good. If I do bad, I'll get bad. So I should probably try to do less bad so I could get more good done. and
there we go.
And right, like that's a very innate part of just how we understand the world as human beings. We understand consequences. We understand if we do something good, there typically will hopefully be a good result. And likewise, something bad, then something bad may happen. But what I do think, and this has just been my own process for, my gosh, now I almost want to say for the last 6-7 years. I mean, my wife and I, we've gone through our own journey of cancer. I mean, even, my own family story, intersects with Mike Heiser's story, and the fact that both Mike and my sister Ruth died on the same day, like literally within hours of one another. And that there is something about suffering and hardship that is universal to the entire human experience, and that the scriptures themselves speak to that universal issue and feeling. One of the, at least for me in the last couple of years, one of the most effective things that has been helpful for me to process and to metabolize grief, pain, hardship, suffering, has been going through the scriptures' wisdom literature. And just seeing realistically how the writers themselves engage with the topic of hardship and suffering when the brokenness of our world intersects with our lives. And another resource that if I could point to people, if they're struggling with how to deal or how to process or how to think about this, how to really kind of theologically think about this, I would recommend a podcast that I had listened to as well a few years ago in the midst of this. I wasn't expecting to be helped. Just thought this was an interesting thing just to listen to. It was done by Christianity Today. It was a little mini series that they did that was called Living and Effective. And season 2 in particular dealt with, originally, they were going to deal with the question about the prosperity gospel. And then as they went through their research, they realized there's an issue underlying the reason why the prosperity gospel is so appealing. And one of the insights they brought out was the prosperity gospel short circuits the natural human process of dealing with grief. Because you have a person that's on a TV screen or at the pulpit who is offering you a way out from having to deal with the hardship and reality of life. If you pay $19.95, if you donate $19.95 to this person, then he guarantees God will circumvent or stop whatever you're experiencing that's hard and reroute. And it provides a way out of having to go through the grief, having to go through the pain, having to go through accepting what reality is right now in this moment of life. And that's the why I personally don't like the prosperity gospel, is because it is short-circuiting or is providing an escape hatch to people when really you're preventing them from actually going through the process of metabolizing their grief and their pain. And that's a necessary human process that has to happen. Otherwise, growth won't happen. Maturity won't happen. And really, even comprehending God and life itself won't grow as much if we do not go through that process. And that, to me, is part of the reason why over time it's not just theologically wrong, but humanly, how it affects people in the long term, it doesn't help. It just short circuits the actual human process that God has made for us to metabolize and go through pain and grief. His own son went through that process before the cross.
Yeah, I'm totally onto that one, where we are so good as Reformed soteriologists to talk about the death of Jesus doing something. But I think the story is that the faithfulness unto death is what really catches the New Testament writers' understanding of the theological work of Christ. It's, that work he did required faithfulness to the point that you and I probably will never face. So,
yeah. I think
someone once said to me, what if the only people that saw your blessing would be your grandchildren? What if God's plan for your life is for you to die, never seeing the blessing of your own loyalty, and that it would be saved? Kind of like, Jeremiah 29:11, a verse we have on our refrigerators at home. I promise, I give you a future and a hope. But verse 14 tells you where the hope is. I will bring you back from your captivity. It's your kids that will see it, not you. So crazy.
Yeah,
but so real, so true.
I think our modern evangelical culture here, at least in the U.S., we are very weak in any sort of theology of processing through suffering and pain. Like, and again, it's probably a byproduct of our Western society having had Christianity be the dominant, theological thinking for 1,500 something odd years, and we don't know how to deal with non-triumphalism. We don't know how to deal with when all you can do is be silent in the midst of a person's grief. Right? We always want to try to make the person happy or be encouraged, but there are moments where all you can do is mourn with those who are mourning.
And not that I understand it. I hope I don't give, nor you. We're not trying to tell listeners how to handle pain as though it makes sense. I mean, I'm still struck by the pain of the world, not only my own, but the pain of the world, and wonder how God's going to come around the other side and rectify, as it were, and make it right. So, well, let's get into 40 and 41. Again, what I'm going to do is just summarize the story. We're not going to read it all, but if anyone's read it, they know there's a good ending to this. So, but we're in the middle of the pain right now. He's in jail. So, he's thrown into an Egyptian prison at the beginning of 40. He was suspected of molesting his master's wife, and yet his character brings him by the end of 39, very quickly told, his character still shines through, and he's soon placed in charge of the affairs of the entire prison. So incredible how that even changes. And then we're told again that the Lord was with Joseph. So something good is about to happen. In verses 1-4 of chapter 40, he's again put in charge of all the affairs, including two men, the butler or the cupbearer and the baker. And they're in a holding cell awaiting some kind of charge. Verse 5, they both have a dream. And again, in this world, we've already had in Genesis, numerous dreams, chapters 20, 28, 31, 37, where dreams have cosmic meaning. And so these two men in that culture were both interested in finding the meaning of this experience. And so in verses 6-8, Joseph recognizes their nervousness, asks them if he can ask if his God, we presume, again, he's telling them about his deity compared to the one they worship, and he's claiming that his deity could tell them the meaning of these dreams. And so the butler goes first, starting in verse 9. He tells of a vine that was, giving abundance of fruit, and he holds the fruit, as it were, up to Pharaoh himself. And Joseph plays on the word "up" there, telling the butler that his head would be lifted up, and in that sense, it would be, or the meaning would be metaphorically, that he would be released from prison and his position would be restored. In verses 12 and 13, we read that. So, all Joseph asked for, and this is just, again, so narratively beautiful. He says, by the way, can you remember me when you get out? Tell the Pharaoh, who told you this, and that, again, presuming his innocence, that even the Pharaoh may have known of it. Well, he's encouraged by the news, the baker is, and so he says, hey, can you interpret my dream? He has a dream of 3 baskets of bread on his head with birds eating out of it. And he again seemed to recognize the meaning, though, Joseph did, and he's very reticent to say what it is. The baker would have his head lifted off of him. Again, that up the up idea is used, but it's up in a different way. The head literally coming off of him. So he predicted that he would soon be killed upon the order of the Pharaoh, verses 16 through 19, which of course happens. Both dreams come true down to the very last detail within 3 days, we're told. So now we're up to verse 23. And actually we finished, that's all of chapter 40. Well, that was fast. Nothing again that I sense in a divine counsel worldview different than, except the conversation I think would have been fun to hear between Joseph and the two men when it came to his God and what kind of God he worshiped. Verse 8, Joseph said, "Do not interpretations belong to Elohim?" No article. "Tell them to me, please." So whatever he knew about his deity and whether he knew even if his deity would tell him the meaning of the dream, I'm not sure. But again, I'm just thinking they would have had an interesting conversation about the concept of deity and which deity they worshiped and so forth. So that's chapter 40. From what we can tell, he's still not much older than 17. From 17 or from 37-2, he was taken down to Egypt when he was 17. So I suppose a few years have gone, but not a lot. Anything you want to add to that? Otherwise, quick retelling of 40.
I mean, one, humorously, I would probably say is like, okay, maybe this is not always a good idea to have your dreams interpreted.
That's true.
But
have you ever had a dream where you know it's God? I mean, I'll be happy to tell you, Mike, Dr. Heiser's story to me one time. We were driving somewhere, and I forget how dreams came up, but he told me a story about his dreams and how he decided how to use them or take them.
I think you had mentioned something. It was something about some house that's red.
Oh, there we go. If I already told the story on the podcast, then I don't need to retell it. But it was a recurring dream of a burning farmhouse. It was red, I think, or something like that. And I said, "Well, what's the meaning to you?" He says, "Well, I'm never buying a red farmhouse. That's all."
I mean,
he was very practical about it, but
that sounds just like Dr. Heiser, because he would have because he often would refer back to the moment of David, sort of asking Yahweh about, Fudu Unum and Thunum, like, oh, if I go to this town, will these people betray me? Or will they hand me over to Saul? And the answer is yes. It's like, okay, so then I will not go to that town.
Not going to the town.
And so that possibility of that happening is completely just cut off right at the knees. Like, it ain't gonna happen if I don't show up. What I do find interesting is like, and I like that you brought it up, that these two people are not Israelite. They're not Yahweh worshipers necessarily. And so it is very interesting how the word is being played with, Elohim.
Yeah.
Because Joseph is probably thinking of it from the perspective as a Yahwist. Do not interpretations belong to Yahweh, really, in his mind. But he's using the word Elohim, which in their minds could be almost interpreted as do not interpretations belong to gods.
Yep.
And it's to Egyptian pagan worshipers who have, been in a culture where there's multiple worships of different gods and goddesses. This doesn't sound anything different. But what's different is that this guy's particular God, whoever Joseph is worshiping, gave Joseph the correct interpretation. And it's like a real lived out interpretation, because one lived and the other one, exactly. Well, he lived for a little while only to realize, oh no, it's actually coming true. It's interesting about how just even that itself is the narrator's way of showing Yahweh was with Joseph, because Yahweh is giving Joseph this very special skill to hear someone's dream and to be able to properly interpret it and say, this is what it means, and this is probably what will happen. And so be careful. And then starting to build this reputation about Joseph amongst, I'm pretty sure, already his reputation amongst the prisoners must already be at a high enough value. If the guard of the prison is willing to let Joseph be in charge of the prison, the other prisoners must also like Joseph, that they don't try to rebel against Joseph. Of like, okay, he's a pretty just dude. He's going to treat us rightly. and he'll make sure that we're not mistreated. You know, he will speak for us, and like there's something about him. His character is somehow shining, even in this very literal dark, dank hole. That's something about him. It is attractive, and is drawing people to him. So
I can't help but think it would be, again, those conversations he had about his God. I just can't help but think that's where he's hanging his future on how his God will take care of him. That's how the story unfolds. So
what I wouldn't give to just hear sometimes his own musings about this, because when we started learning a little bit about Joseph, one of the worst things that happened in his life is he gets thrown into a well. And now he's thrown into a prison. But I could almost imagine him saying to himself, well, at least it's a little drier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm older than you enough to look back upon and I do this with Susan every now and then, look back upon our life thinking, okay, God doesn't talk to me audibly, but boy, does he take care of me. I mean, just little things and big things. And how did we get to that thing? Or, how God had to manipulate a situation for us to do this, that, or the other. And just some amazing things that I can't wait for heaven itself to review all those stories when we have time with each other and know that God was doing things behind the scenes that only he could do. And I'm young enough, I believe, hopefully, that I get to see a lot more, because I think God, if I can anthropomorphize him a moment, he gets a kick out of that. He one time I did this in church. I was preaching, and I took and this took a long time. I went down to a local video store and borrowed, I think, 150. This is back in the VHS days where they each had a cover. It was a Blockbuster.
Yeah.
And I said, do you have any empty Blockbuster cases, VHS cases? And they had a whole bunch of them. And they said, okay, as long as you get them back to us the next day, I will give them to you. So I had like 150 or 200 of them. And I lined them up like dominoes from the podium where I was preaching all the way back around through the baptistry, coming out, then the back other door. In other words, they disappeared behind the stage, and then they came back out, and they worked their way up to a button on the overhead projector. This is back in the post-Civil War days, overhead projectors, and I said, my illustration was really for the junior hires in the room. I said, now there's two ways I can turn on the overhead projector. I can either walk over and push the button, and I pushed the first domino, as it were, and it took about 2 or 3 minutes for all these cases to work their way through the baptistry. And I even had someone way in the back making sure it worked, because I didn't want to lose it halfway through. And it comes out the other door and finally tick, 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 tick. And it comes up to the overhead projector and turns on the overhead. And my point was, simple point, God could miraculously do a lot of things. But what he usually does is tick, 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 tick. He uses events that are tied to other events in order to accomplish a bigger thing. So that was my illustration, and I enjoyed doing it. It took all Saturday night. I wasted a lot of good study time on setting up video cases, but that was a good memory for me, the preacher, to remind myself that when I pray, God sometimes his answer will be, well, do you got 2 years? Because it's going to take a while, but I'm going to have fun putting together a story that will blow your mind. So
I think there's something about that. I mean, as simple and as cool as that was, because that would have been like a really cool moment if I was in your youth ministry moment, Ron. But there's a marvel, right? Because you're seeing how every piece, as it knocks over the next, it's a progression, but you're noticing how it's just moving through, and you see how if one domino, or in this case, one VHS case was not in proper place, then this whole entire thing would not work, right? It wouldn't hit the button. But somehow it does, because it was actually arranged in such a way that it would have that effect. And I think that's...
And yet none of those were a miraculous deed in itself.
Yeah.
But they combined, as it were. And that's where my atheist friend and I, we've had long talks about this. He would say, you have a blessed life, if you want to call it that, but it's all chance, right? It's chance. And I say, well, that's the thing. I don't think it's chance. I think it's God. And he says, well, yeah, but where did he ever do anything for you? Where's your miracle? To which I'll say, well, I don't have a miracle in mind. I can't think of one thing that, God walked over to the overhead projector and turned it on himself. But I have hundreds of stories that when you put them all together, I just can't imagine, A, what fun God had in doing that, and B, how it could have worked any other way, looking back. It's just staggering. But that's the thing. What's happened to me has happened to you. And everyone has these memories of where God did something that took a lot of time sometimes, but just amazing. Ready 41. Let's see what happens. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years. So again, can you give God 2 years? Poor Joseph sitting in prison. 2 years goes by, nothing happens. The butler forgot to mention Joseph to the Pharaoh. We're hearing at the end of 40. And so now Pharaoh's turn is to have dreams. And he sees these 7 cows who are, quote, attractive of appearance and fat of flesh. So big fat cows who are eaten by 7 other cows who are of what he calls bad appearance, thin of flesh. Mm-hmm. And so as odd as that scene was, the whole thing happens again, this time with grain. And so now we're up to verse 7 of chapter 41. Well, what does this mean? Here's where a divine counsel worldview could have predicted what he would have done. He's a theist, if not a polytheist, right? Mm-hmm. Pharaoh believes in gods. He believes that in the world of the divine, they give dreams and they know the meaning of dreams. Well, how do you find the meaning of dreams? Then you talk to your magician, or magicians in this case. So he turns to them. These would be the kinds of Egyptian priests who were understood to have a contact with the divine world, of course. But they're unable to say anything. In verse 8, all it says is, none of them could interpret them for Pharaoh. Now, either, again, your opinion would be interesting, Mike. My opinion is one of 2 things. Either they saw it as a negative meaning and they were scared. Why would I tell the Pharaoh something he doesn't want to hear? Or B, we have another story of Yahweh shutting down divine information at this point. He just turns the faucet off and doesn't allow the Elohim who are working with these magicians, which I think that's why they were hired in the first place. They did have this kind of knowledge and they could tell the Pharaoh different things. But in this case, again, because gods are real in my mind, that's why we're told not to be magicians and to deal in this, right? That these men who normally could function in the divine world in some sense, or at least have information, were somehow given a quiet answer or no answer at all. And they were realizing that they don't have it that day. So I'm not sure which one to go with, but any opinion?
I think, again, before ever encountering just even the thinking about the supernatural, the DCW itself, I think I probably would have gone with the interpretation that these magicians were charlatans. They were just making it up in the first place, and they were not, that you don't get real messages from other divine beings because they're not really real, kind of thing.
Right.
But here, I mean, in the aftermath of this, there is that interesting realization. Okay, they are magicians and wise men. They obviously were hired, or they had a reputation where they could contact the spiritual world and they could actually provide some legitimacy to it. Otherwise, you'd be killed for claiming something that false. Yet something is stopping them. And it's very interesting and almost very telling. It's almost a telegraph as we move later on. We know that the book of Exodus is coming. And there's this almost this interesting thing of like, something is getting in the way of this normal human to a divine being connection that these magicians had taken for granted, and they can't. They can't understand the dream. Maybe there is a little bit of fear if they had some sort of inkling, because it is kind of scary and kind of freakish to hear a dream of like 7 thin cows just devouring like zombies, 7 fat cows.
Might have been scary.
You're just like, oh, that's disturbing. That's not normal. And so, yeah, I mean, it could be, maybe it's a combination of both. Like if they couldn't get any sort of interpretation from the supernatural world, but even just the dream itself is disturbing. Who wants to try to attempt to interpret something that disturbing?
Yeah.
And so,
well, they saw what happened to the baker, I'm sure.
Yeah.
All righty. So, verses 9 to 13, it was now the butler's turn to remember. Oh, that's right. Joseph, 2 years ago, had accurately interpreted his own dream. And so the king brought in Joseph to the courtroom and told him both of the dreams. Again, we have that exacting detail repeated. And as before, Joseph seemed to notice the meaning of the dreams immediately. And he says, I like verse 16, "It is not me, the God," there is no article there. God, Elohim will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. So he again credits his deity, I take it, to mean, or actually there is the article there. I looked, I have no, and then I have, in 16, there is no article. In 25, that's where the article is. So anyway, Elohim will give Pharaoh. So, I take it to mean the Elohim I worship. Otherwise, this story would have no sense. So the meaning of the dreams, again, as he gets into, this is in verses 26 to 32. The meaning of the dreams pertained to the economy of Egypt and what was going to happen in the future. Mm-hmm. The Nile River, of course, which gives Egypt its yearly, very sustainable, expected way of living that would, drain out into what's northern or lower Egypt. Took care of them usually every year. But this time, 7 years of plenty would be overtaken by 7 years of extreme plight or poverty. And so it's going to be a 14-year process that is going to have to be very carefully worked out, said Joseph. And what could be done? What's the best thing to do? Let's see if I can, any other verses here that I wanted to bring up. Well, 25, Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one." In other words, they have the same meaning. "The Elohim has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do." He repeats that in 28. And then 32, "The dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice because the thing is established by the Elohim, and the Elohim will shortly bring it to pass." Again, I'm sure that he doesn't say Yahweh without a name, of course, doesn't know what it is, but he is explaining as something I'd love to see, how his deity works with him compared to how the magicians could not answer what, same idea. In other words, his deity is the one who's in charge of either quieting other deities or giving information that could otherwise not be known. And his point then to the Pharaoh in 33, "Let the Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt." This idea of agency, again, is interesting, how Pharaoh will be credited with all this, but it's going to be done through someone else. Mm-hmm. And the 36, "Then that food shall be a reserve after 7 years of plenty. If you do it the right way, then you'll have enough for the 7 years of famine, which shall be, and then we will not die." So I'm up to 36.
Ron, can I just
anything
bring up
otherwise?
something here?
Should we go ahead and finish it off? "So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of his servants." Verse 37, "And he says to his servants, 'Can we find such a one as this?'" And notice again the phraseology, which would not be coming from a Jewish theology book. So we can't put capital S's on spirit here. "Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God?" Don't think Trinitarian thought. This is the Pharaoh talking. So clearly Pharaoh's not going to be a Trinitarian the way we want him to be. He's talking about, here's my opinion. This is a small s and a small g. And the concept of a spirit would be the presence of, the mind of, the understanding of a deity. So I would read it this way. Can we find such a one as this, Joseph, a man in whom is the presence of Elohim? Something like that. So again, I'm so frustrated with my Bible that it would capitalize the S on spirit. What are you doing? I mean, how in the world can you put into the words of a Pharaoh a Trinitarian idea? That's just so off the beaten path. I can't imagine how that got through the editors there in my version. Does your Bible have a capital S on spirit in 38?
Yes, it does. In the ESV.
Why would they do that? What are they trying to...
I think, what's interesting, and I was trying to say something a little bit earlier, Ron, where, again, folks, they do need to take a look as well to like the verbs that are connected to the word Elohim, because we know that what Joseph is talking about is one singular Elohim. He's talking probably about Yahweh, and the verbs that are connected to him are all in the singular person, right? So third person, singular masculine. It's being used of Elohim and is being connected to the God or the Elohim. And so it's singular there. Well, to address your question, Ron, about 38, I think it really depends on how you land on this, right? Because from the Pharaoh's perspective, we know, and I brought it up about the cupbearer and the baker. they're hearing Joseph say the word Elohim. They're probably thinking gods. Joseph is probably thinking, no, Yahweh, a singular one. But they don't know that. Versus here, the Pharaoh, he's saying this. And I would almost kind of I could see it going either way, depending on how you want to interpret, or how you want to convey it to the reader or the audience. If I'm coming from a Jewish perspective, and I know ultimately the one that is actually empowering Joseph is, Yahweh himself, then his very breath, his wind, his ruah, is ultimately what is empowering him. Pharaoh doesn't realize this, but he's speaking as he's sort of like later on, right, in the Gospel of John, you would have the high priest make a declaration about how one man, isn't it better for one man to die for the entire nation? And yet he meant it as one thing of it's better to kill Jesus for the benefit of the whole nation. But his words, ironically, when you look back on it, there's a double meaning to it. And so I could almost see that the interpretation could have gone down the pathway of the Pharaoh doesn't understand it. Yes, he doesn't know who Yahweh is, but the audience knows. It's almost like a wink. Who is ultimately the spirit of God. I mean,
and thanks for pulling me off the edge of my cliff when I'm frustrated.
I mean, I get why you like I would sometimes feel that too, because I think sometimes it's just better to leave that ambiguity and let people actually discuss. Ask if it's a small s. Is the spirit like the spirit, or are we just talking about, just the breath or the influence? And have people discuss, because that's a great way for people to learn, versus we're baking right into this right there. So I can see it falling either way. I do think it's a more ideal if we leave it as a small s, because then you let people process and work through the scripture and try to figure out, well, how would have Pharaoh understood this? How would Joseph heard this? Right? Because
Let me take you to another verse and see if you agree with me on this one. Exodus 8. And you can tell by the text who's going to be talking here. It's another Pharaoh. Exodus 8:25. Should we capitalize the G here? Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, "Go sacrifice to your God in the land." Every version I have is capital G.
Yep.
I can't imagine. See, there to me, make it a small g. Talk like Pharaoh for me. So I can, let the audience think, should we capitalize the G there? He's talking about Yahweh. No, not again, in his mind, he has no loyalty to that deity whatsoever. Yeah. So I would love those kind of moments to get the capital G down to a small and let the audience hear it and say, well, okay, double entendre. He should have capitalized it, but he didn't. I know Pharaoh. And it just happens through early Exodus. You get this all the time.
And in regards to that particular verse in Exodus 25, even the pronoun with your God, it's plural to match up with Elohim. So an interpretation of this could potentially be also go sacrifice to your gods within the land.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you.
And again, though, it comes back down to like at times how translators will want to telegraph certain details. They don't want to leave the reader at times confused. That's a really healthy debate that should often be held, right? Because Pharaoh means it one way. How does Moses and Aaron and the people of God later on, as they read this, how would they have interpreted it? Is there a way to honor both of the meanings so that it's left there? And maybe the solution is to say your God with a small g, so that one, you give way to those who understand he's talking about Yahweh, but then you also leave it open to the fact that Pharaoh doesn't know who Yahweh is.
Right. Yeah.
So it's an interpretive exercise, and it's a dance. I sense whenever we're trying to render the text in a way that makes sense to the audience that's going to be reading the English.
You and I both often get asked, what's the best version of the Bible to read that supports a divine counsel worldview? And I'd say, well, Hebrew and Greek are your only hope, but English, some are, at least like the Net, will have study notes that usually at least give you that option, or at least let you in on that, or will tell you what's in the Hebrew often or Greek that would support a divine counsel reading. But until there's a divine counsel worldview study Bible, which I don't, that would be such a major project. And some parts of me say it's not worth a project, because then it would make people not do the work themselves. And a lot of what we're doing, just over our coffee cup on these podcasts, Mike, anyone can do it. You just look at the text, understand that Elohim is not a name. Mm-hmm. It's never capitalized. Always take the capital G off God and let the text, work through that. And then if you want to capitalize it in your head, go ahead. But that kind of thing is good for me to do, even though I have a text that kind of presumes things before I even read it.
And to be honest, there are resources beyond just, you don't have to buy a Bible software like Logos or Accordance in order to even have access to just some of that basic information about singular, right, masculine, plural or not. There are so many online tools now, like Blue Letter Bible, that would provide access to some of the underlying manuscripts and Hebrew and Greek, so that you can see, is this plural? Is this singular? Those are free resources folks can also use. But again, it takes intentionality. And I think
it's a lot of time.
Yeah.
I'll grant that, just the amount of time it would take, or it takes us already, but I find it, as you do, very enjoyable. And reading my Bible this way is what I would call, in a very theologically heavy meaning here, a hoot. It's just fun. And I enjoy it that way. Well, Proverbs 21:1, the king's heart is in the hand of Yahweh. I think, again, it just shows in Proverbs 21 lingo, the stories that the Jews have in their mind of how God controls pharaohs and kings is something that even the proverb writer can put into his book of wisdom, that you have a right every time to look back upon a story like this and know that there's still one author to the story. There's still one creator, sustainer of the world. Even though this is the Egyptian Pharaoh who worships other gods, guess whose heart is holding it? Or guess who's holding this man's heart? According to Proverbs 21:1, it's Yahweh. So here we go. Verse 37, the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh. And he says, well, verse 38, I'm talking to him. Who else but this man who has the spirit of Elohim should be the man to be the one to be the vizier, as it were, the person who's directly under the Pharaoh, who only has to account to one person ahead of him now. God turns his heart, I would say, would be a very fair way of describing this. 42 through 47, the land then is very fruitful, just like we were promised, the dream said. So for 7 years, rain and crops. By the way, he marries This is in 45. Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zephanath-Paneah, probably designed again after his pantheon of gods. He gave him as a wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. So it's interesting, his dad-in-law is a priest of a foreign deity. So, yet Joseph is faithful, even though he's been given this wife. And I have never read, isn't there, what's the apocryphal work of Joseph and Asenath? I think it's even called that. And so there is Jewish tradition. It's not canonical, but there is Jewish tradition around this, that Asenath becomes a believer, a Yahwist, through the work of, or the witness of her husband, Joseph. He's 30 years old now in verse 46. The year is 1885. That now means 30. Go back to the 17 of 37-2. We've had 13 years that have transpired. The point being, it's nice to know the age here, because when he meets his brothers, they're not going to recognize him. He's older. He's wearing Egyptian clothing. He's speaking Egyptian. The whole thing has changed. So that's up to 47. From 48 to 52. Now comes he's given two children. God gives him two children, Ephraim and Manasseh. Mm-hmm. And now comes the famine, 53 to the end of the chapter. And as the famine hits, he's in control of much more than just Egypt now. He's in control of really life and death for everyone. So verse 54 again helps our chronology. The 7 years of famine began to come, and 45:11, I'd have to look ahead to see what I marked that. Oh, there's still 5 more years. So that's where we get the 22 years between his brothers coming and when they last saw him. Is putting together verse 54 of 41 and 45:11. Add that all up. He's going to be 22 years older than when they met him, or when they last saw him. Verse 55, people cried to Pharaoh. There's again this concept of agency where, they're crying to everyone else. They probably never see the Pharaoh, but Pharaoh is credited as the person through whom everything, all the events now are working. I love 57. The story ends with, at this point, you could almost say that everything's happy. Verse 57, it's all done. The story ends with this idea. So all countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain. The story, we could even say, ends there. But, of course, the story will turn back to the 11 brothers. What happened to them? How is God going to follow through on his promise to Jacob, for example? He's back up in Canaan, and we're going to find out later that there's a famine going on up there as well. So anything to add, Mike, as we finish up 41? By the time we come to the end of 41, it's Joseph who sells to all the people of the land. This might even be, I'd even call it, the key moment of all of Genesis at this point. That you have a boy who's supposedly sent off to slavery, to his own death, and by the time you reverse this whole story out, because Yahweh was with Joseph, now we have him in charge of the entire world. Egypt is the prime kingdom of the world at this point. Mm-hmm. So talk about a reversal. We've gone from a pit all the way to be second in command. And we could end the book of Genesis here and say, God is a great God. Look at what he did. But of course, what we've got to do is finish out the promise made to an otherwise forgotten man up in Shechem by the name of Jacob. So we'll go there next time.
I do find that just the narrative itself is quite beautifully crafted, right? Because we get this reminder and hint about Joseph repeatedly ever since he's even introduced at the beginning chapters ago, of how he had favor his dad put him in charge of things. He would tell his dad what his brothers had done. Like, he's already given the sense of being a manager. Like, he knows how to administrate. And that takes a lot of particular skills and ways of thinking, how to organize things. And then we keep seeing these glimpses of, well, he can manage an entire household and he knows how to do it well. And he knows what's off limits, like his master's wife. He doesn't touch that. and then even when he's in the worst of places, like a prison, yet he knows how to take care of that both the guard in charge of the prison and all the prisoners, they're happy with him, taking care of matters, making sure everyone is taken care of it and treated justly. And then finally we get to this point. He's now in charge of an entire country, and not just the entire country. He's now also responsible for the welfare of other people groups who are coming to Egypt in order to survive this famine. That his responsibilities keep increasing, and so does his skill in how to actually administer and take care of people. And it's a very fascinating thing. You see this glimpse and you're just wondering, in reading earlier, it's like, what's the point of mentioning that he can take care of a household? What's the point of mentioning he can take care of a prison? And then it builds off into this big payoff of, because he can manage an entire country, and not just countries. He can take care of all these people.
It causes some commentators, as I was preparing for this, it's stunning to me how especially critical or liberal scholarship is not even thinking this is real, that this is probably just a tradition. And I get the feeling from some commentators, they're saying to themselves, this is such good stuff, it can't have happened. There's no way. And I'm going to recommend, I'm sure most of us would say, well, wait a second, if God can do anything and he enjoys tipping over dominoes in such a way that you can't believe the end from the beginning, meanwhile, there were no miracles in between, except the interpretation of some dreams. Isn't that just like God, though? And so I think if we underestimate the historicity of this kind of story, we're doing God injustice. I can bear the question of, and I have, for seminary's sake and all that, was Jonah history or is Jonah a story? I tend to believe it's history based on how it's presented. But again, if I find out someday that Jonah was a story that Jews told about their heritage, I'm not going to lose, sleep over that. To me, though, this kind of story, the way it's presented and plus just the way Yahweh seems to work in not only the biblical story, but in my life, this is how he does it. It's thing after thing after thing that put them all together. You look back and you say, wow, this has been a thing of beauty. And I can't point to one event that was a miracle. So I think with that, go ahead.
I think with the resistance or, the skepticism that comes in, unfortunately, I think that there is a little bit of the Western modern 21st century, hubris that kicks in of like, oh, if we would not have written this story this way because we're more sophisticated. And I think there is that sense of pride that kicks in of, well, sure, we would not have written it this way, but we are dealing with an ancient people who thought this was the best way to convey their sense of history and story and origins. And we have to respect that and work with what we have that is there. My early days at Gordon, one of the best professors I had was a professor in church history. And he kept reminding us over and over again that as historians, we have to deal with how people in that current moment in time would have understood what was going on around them. We may not agree with their assessment. We may not think that they are right, but we have to look at history and the events from their perspective in order to then make sense of their actions and their choices. And so that takes a lot of humility, because you have to put aside your own preferences and acknowledge this is a very different text. This is a different person. This is a different way of thinking. And that means I have to respect, in order for me to comprehend them, I have to respect where they are coming from. And so I think, you mentioned this earlier a few podcasts ago about the importance of reading left to right, understanding the perspective of the people who wrote this, the audience that they were trying to convey this. This is part of what the work we're doing here in this podcast is, trying to understand it from that perspective and not come at it from a modern Western way of thinking, and realizing we are journeying to a different land and to a literally different time, and understanding the people in that moment, why they made the choices. Of course, it wouldn't make sense from this perspective. Pharaoh would just say to this guy, well, obviously you can interpret my dream, which no one else could interpret. Who better to take care of things? And I heard good things about you taking care of the prison. So if you could take care of the prison, maybe I'll take a chance on you that you can take care of this thing. I have no idea what to do. And anyways, I get the sense of what the authors chose to leave us with is to just like, holy cow, that's the payoff. That's why he kept mentioning all this stuff before, that Joseph can administer. He can do this. He could take care of a household. He could take care of a prison, because it's leading to this moment that will affect everyone in the land.
Yeah, everything. Well, let's save that for next time. We'll jump into 42. The brothers will show up, 10 of them at first, and then we'll kind of enjoy, We're going to enjoy, as you say, figuring out or watching how God can twist and turn his way through an amazing end to our book. So, and did I mention last time we're going to go to the book of John after this? So as we got 2 or 3 podcasts to go, be ready for our next, or begin getting ready, shall we say, for our next study, the book of John. Can't wait to do it. It's going to start a lot like Genesis, right? In the beginning was the Word. So,
yep,
it'll be a good jumping off point. All right. Thank you, Mike. And everyone will have a blessed week, and we'll talk to you again.